Hi, thanks for dropping in and joining us on this presentation of how to create alignment between owners and service leaders. My name is Rex Frank, and joining me is Dan Saxby. So let's go ahead and get started.
Hi, everybody. Wish we were in Orlando, but glad we're here virtually. So I work for My Tech Partners based out of Minnesota. I live in Cincinnati. I had been the program manager for a couple of Evolve programs, including the Service Executive Peer Group, which is sort of the basis of this leadership and alignment that we're working on today. And before that, I was vice president of an MSP in Cincinnati and spent a lot of years making a lot of mistakes so that we could come up with this tool today.
And I'm Rex Frank, founder and CEO of C-Level Operations. Next week actually is our 10-year anniversary for C-Level. I was really hoping to be in Orlando at IT Nation Connect to kind of throw our 10-year anniversary party, but it looks like next year we'll have to have a 10-year plus one anniversary party. So hopefully we'll see you all there. I have a little over 32 years experience. I started in 1988 in the industry as a tech, got promoted into that service manager role, went through this journey that we're going to talk about today until 2008 when I founded C-Level. So, or 2010, I founded C-Level. So I was,
Congratulations.
so I was CTO at one firm for 19 years, Alvaca Networks in Southern California, where I kind of grew slowly. And I was a member of a service execs peer group from 2004 to 2008. So some of the best times of my life. And then spent about a year and a half as a VP of managed services in Seattle at Northwest Computer Support, and another year with Jameson West as his director of operations. So I really learned a lot about myself as I challenged myself to become a better service executive over my career. So Dan, why don't you tell us about kind of why we created this workbook?
Absolutely. So what we have found in the past few years while doing the Service Executive Peer Group program that was part of HTG and now part of ConnectWise and IT Nation Evolve is that there is a missing link in the chain of running the service department. And that link is nearly at the very top of it or at the beginning of it, where the owner's expectations or the managing director, wherever you come from, what you call it, and then the start of where the service manager sits, we miss a piece. And a lot of times both are doing their absolute best, but they're not doing enough to make sure that we've got alignment. And what I have experienced personally, what I have seen with dozens of companies, and Rex has shared the same sorts of experiences, is that we just need a tool. We need something to sort of push you over the edge to get things started. And so this is now the third iteration of our leadership alignment plan over the years that we've done. And I'm sure there will be a fourth and a fifth in the coming years. But this one is very exciting because Rex worked with me on it. So this is a IT Nation Evolve powered by C-Level Operations. And hopefully with all of our heads working together, we can help you as a service exec or help you as a business owner create alignment with each other. So we're going to start off with goals, create a meeting rhythm, and kind of work our way through this sort of plan. Now, Rex, I bet there's people out here, though, that are already doing things without this workbook. What advice do you give them? Do you say scrap it all and stick to this workbook? Or do you say, you know what? What's your advice?
I'd say use the workbook to get the great ideas. They're going to help you decide what's going to work best for you and your owner. But take the ideas. You may use the workbook. You may decide to do some of it using ConnectWise Manage or any other tools, maybe part of your EOS methodology. But the most important thing is to look at what we're saying you should be doing and then make it work for you. And Dan, I don't want to leave out Lori Sorensen's role in helping us
Ooh,
with this workbook either. She was definitely a
Lori's the
big help
best.
to both of us. So
Lori is great. For those that don't know Lori, look her up.
so we're recording this, like I said, a couple weeks ago, and we believe that you'll be able to download this spreadsheet from the resources section inside the virtual virtual conference tool that we're using. If for some reason that's not the case, at the end, we'll have 10 or 15 minutes of live Q&A, and we'll definitely at that point make sure you know where you can download the spreadsheet we're going to be talking about. But as of now, we believe it's going to be in the resources section, hopefully over there.
There.
So like I said, we're going to be bouncing back and forth between an Excel sheet while we go through this. So on the main tab, which we'll look at in a minute, there's we're going to ask you to have a weekly accountability rhythm. I don't know if you're fans of traction in the EOS methodology, but one common factor we see in all the more mature companies is that they have very standardized regular meeting rhythms. They prioritize keeping their meeting rhythms over the tyranny of the urgent and the day-to-day that comes up. The low maturity companies are going to cancel those meetings. The higher maturity companies realize how important they are in the day-to-day operations of the business. And then we're also going to ask you to define and understand your accountability chart. And the accountability charts can be so important because it helps the owner and the service executive and others in the organization understand how they're, what their responsibilities are and when they should not be stepping on anybody else's toes. And Dan, I'll let you kind of fill in if you have any other comments there, as well as maybe an introduction to the 4 plans.
Yeah, absolutely. So meeting rhythm at our MSP, we had quite a few meeting rhythms, and those were like the anchor, and it was critical for success. I think my favorite thing about the phrase accountability chart is that we hear the phrase, responsibility chart, accountability chart, organization chart. All of it put together tells a story, and it's super critical. Now, the 4 plans. So the 4 plans for those that are service execs or not members of Evolve have never heard of this. But every principal or owner within an Evolve company is obligated each quarter to update or create one of these 4 plans. And they are awesome, and they are a ton of work. But what the reason that we push these plans is because if you're not planning for success, you will trip and fall. Okay. If you're not planning, if you get in a car and you say, we're going to go on a road trip, but you have no vision of where you're going or no map, you're going to go nowhere quick. So when it comes to these 4 plans, there's 2 in particular that we want you as owners to share with you as service executives, and that's part of the business plan and part of the leadership plan. The business plan is, here's our goals, especially for revenue, service revenue, margin percent, those sorts of things. And then the leadership plan is, this is a key person in our business, and without him or her, we aren't going to make it. So what we want to do is have the business owner chart one of your service execs as a key leader in that leadership plan. So we're going to dovetail those 2, and where there are some tabs to look at for those.
Yeah, so if we take a look at, this is your first look at the workbook, but on the main tab down here is where you'll see that we're asking you to decide, this is the 1-hour meeting, and EOS would advocate a 90-minute meeting, that you're set aside specifically to keep the owner and the service executive aligned. In EOS vernacular, it might be called the same page meeting between the visionary and the integrator. We're asking you to link to where your organizational chart exists. And in some of your early meetings, your agenda item might be create an accountability chart, right? So, and then a link to where that business plan is and where that life plan is. And you may find that the owner hasn't taken the time to create their business plan or their leadership plan yet. And that may be something that you guys can work on together also as an agenda item.
And Rex, real quick, anecdotally, 90 minutes is a long time. So if I'm in an MSP that has never done weekly meetings, 90 minutes is going to feel hard. Is it better to start small and to get there, or to, if you can't do 90 minutes, just bail on the whole thing?
Well, I would definitely agree with you that if you're not doing meetings at all, get started on something that's recurring. We're going to have some, as we look through the agenda that from our workbook, you'll find it may not be that difficult to fill that much time. And under the EOS methodology, if you're really identifying key issues and doing what they call IDS, identify, discuss, and solve, uh, oftentimes we find that 90 minutes doesn't seem like enough, but you'll get there.
But let's definitely recommend get started. Get started. And if you're not using Traction or EOS, that's fine. That's fine. We recommend it. It's pretty good.
So on the one-on-one tab, Dan and I are going to kind of go through a couple of slides, and we'll go back and look at the spreadsheet here in a second. But on the one-on-one meeting tab, you're going to find that there's 4 main sections. One is the strategic goals, the financial goals, the tactical goals, and a process for tracking what was accomplished during these one-on-one meetings. So as we look at the financial goals section, which is the top part of this spreadsheet, we're going to find that we're going to ask you to say, what is your target gross margin percent, right? Like, and that's basically get an understanding of, we're not going to be able to get there this quarter, but what is it that we're working toward to try to achieve? The second one is going to be, what is our goal for this quarter? And the third one is what did we achieve from a service gross margin perspective for last quarter? The second thing we're going to be looking at is for you to define strategic goals. Now, if the owners in the ConnectWise Evolve owners peer groups, they should be setting strategic goals quarterly, using their peers and their microboard to come up with what the most important strategic goals are. But it could be that you're working with your owner and your service executive or your leadership team to decide what the strategic goals are for your company. I've thrown a couple of examples on here, like increase service gross margin from 41 to 44% by the end of the year, or as you increase in your maturity level, the importance of creating a budget and operating and comparing how did we do according to budget, and actually using your budget to help guide your business decisions becomes more and more important. So it may be that we need to create our first budget for the service department. And it may be, and that matter of fact, we have a tab on that later, or it may be we want to achieve Microsoft Gold Cloud Platform competency, by mid 2021. So, and then, we'll be working.
That's excellent. Rex, I was also going to add that there are plenty of strategic goals that might not be necessarily focused on the service department, but without the service executive's help, they won't be accomplished. So it might be increasing sales numbers or retention numbers or account management numbers, which on the onset don't seem like they're service executive goals, but without the service exec support, they may not happen.
Yeah, one of the things I found when I was a member of HTG 12 with Jameson, or even in my coaching at C-level, I find that the owners, if they're in a peer group community, seem to do a pretty good job of getting their goals set because they're held accountable. But they often never share them with their service executive, and they often never share them with anybody else in the company. And then they show up at their next peer group meeting with a lot of yellows and reds that they didn't achieve their goals. And Dan, as an Evolve facilitator, kind of, what do you see?
That's a great point. I mean, the very best principals or owners groups are the ones that do hold each other accountable to it. Where you can see the chinks in the armor, though, are where they set a team-wide goal and they don't get accomplished because they aren't leveraging their team. And that is the sort of alignment that is so critical and why we've made this workbook, is that we know the owners want these strategic goals. And so you've got to create smart tactical goals that go along with it and then apply them to these key leaders, and the service exec, of course, is one of those.
So you said you need to align tactical goals with the strategic goals. And so here's kind of an example of that, where the leadership team is responsible for setting the strategic goals, but then the managers are responsible for aligning tactical goals that you typically assign to individuals. That if we do all of these individual tactical goals, there should be no reason that we don't accomplish the strategic goal. So here's kind of a couple of an example where we might have a strategic goal, right? Increase service gross margin from 41 to 44% by the end of the quarter. Here's some examples of maybe 3 tactical goals, right? We're going to review all of our managed services COGS and tools and find $1,000 in unneeded items. And I know, Dan, you have a great way of saying that.
Well, yes, there's a lot to that, but when it comes to this, so service gross margin, we've got a lot of factors taking place. You can't just go fix service gross margin just by snapping your fingers. You either have to fix the top number, which is your revenue, or the bottom number, which is your cost. And as a service executive, the bottom number, your cost, is a critical piece. So for example, and we've got one here, this first bullet. So review all managed services cost of goods sold and tools and find $1,000 in unneeded items by the end of a period. Okay. And we had September 30th here. So why does this matter? Well, it's because those costs, okay, anytime you've got cost, you need basically double the revenue. And if it's 44, maybe it's not quite double, but you need a large portion of that cost as revenue to cover it. Okay. If not, you are just knocking and undercutting your gross margin percentage out. So the idea of this tactical goal is, will this alone solve your service gross margin goal? Probably not, but it's going to help get there. Okay. So we're going to sit down with the team. We're going to look at all the tools and we're going to decide which tools do we need and which ones do we not need. We look at them. Okay. And if we're not using a tool, we're going to get rid of it. But my knock guys would come to me and they'd say, hey, we found a new tool. It's $200 a month. I'd say, great. We either need $400 in revenue to pay for it a month, or we've got to cut something else out that was $200 a month. And when you start looking at it in very clear terms like that, it becomes easy to manage this gross margin percentage.
Yeah, and I like to say, if that tool, produces $200 in lower costs from labor, right? So somebody is spending 3 minutes a day doing something, and this tool is going to allow us not to spend that 3 minutes a day and get that 3 minutes back that we can translate into revenue, right? At a rate of $2 a minute or $3 a minute, then suddenly that tool is actually helping us move both sides. It's helping us lower our labor costs, and it's helping us increase our revenue. So
well said.
That's why we invest in tools and technology as well as standardization. So, and then I just have a couple other ones in here, right? I might go to my person who's responsible for maintaining our client documentation and say, hey, I need you to standardize our client documentation and bring at least 3 clients to that standard by the end of October, right? And if you notice, I've got the strategic goal says ending 12/31, but some of these tactical goals end in September 30 or October 30th or November 1st. And keep in mind, you can't achieve a goal by 12/31 and expect to have any impact on the gross margin, right? We got to achieve our goals sooner so that the effects have time to work their way into changing the gross margin numbers. And then the last thing that's going to be on this tab is going to be an agenda and a way to track. And again, this tracking we may do in the spreadsheet. We may choose to do in a new ConnectWise ticket every week, or however we plan to do that. But I think it's important to discuss what the goal is we're talking about, how complete that goal is, and what the notes were on that goal. So here's a suggested agenda. Dan, you want to put a little color around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, as we were talking about, if you're using a methodology, don't break it. Okay, don't break it. If you don't have any methodology, then give this a shot. Okay, but the first thing we want you to do is, how are you? How am I? What's going on? Okay, person to person. Then we're going to look at numbers. Okay, so we got the how are you? Now we need the facts. Okay, and the thing about those KPIs and the metrics is that's going to be a whole tab that we're going to look at. That is going to continue to evolve and change over time. Okay, the ultimate goal with these KPIs is that we're tracking the most important things that are the key levers and can change things within your business. Those matter. And Rex, as you've seen, Those change over time depending on the service department. So it might be a very important figure this year, but next year something else happens. Maybe you have a new client, maybe you have a new technology, and it's different sort of ticket. Okay. Then we're going to look at the goals, look at those rocks or big strategic goals, and then anything new that needs to be brought up. And as Rex said, it may seem hard to fill 30 minutes, but before you know it, 90 minutes may not seem all that crazy. And then the way we're tracking here, and Rex is right, we can do it anywhere. Heck, you could even do it in a bright gauge at this point, I think. But what we want to do is number the goal, and we want to put a number by it of how much complete is it. Okay. We don't want guesswork. We want to actually have some real stuff to work with. So you're going to pull it up here, Rex?
Yeah. So as we're looking at the spreadsheet, right, roughly 50-ish%, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less, it would be considered, a well-performing company. And in this scenario, last quarter, maybe we were at, I think in their example, we were saying we were at 41% gross margin. In this quarter, we want to get to 44% or something, right? And that way you're kind of agreeing, this is where we want to get. And I got to tell you, as I started my journey from technician to service manager to service executive, and my owner, a great man named Ole Thorderson, he started showing this stuff to me, and my understanding of it, I remember just really feeling unequipped to have this conversation. And, yeah, I could tell 44% was better than 41%, but I really didn't have any context of what made up those numbers. And I didn't have any context of what kind of decisions I could make to make a change in those numbers. And it only came over years, years of talking about this every quarter, discussing, individual steps I could take, what kind of decisions, if I make a decision to send an engineer to training, right? What is that going to do to gross margin? Well, while they're in the training class, it's going to lower it because they're not out billing. But when they come back with these new skills that we can sell or fill their hours, hopefully it should raise it, right? And it literally was just years of beginning. You got to take that first step of learning. And a couple of years into it, I started feeling much more comfortable with the numbers and able to analyze them. But it's okay if you feel off balance when you get started. I don't know, Dan, do you have any input on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you say a lot, and it's a journey, right? It's a journey. You're taking time to figure this out and get there.
So, what we have done in this spreadsheet is, the owner should have a pretty good idea what their strategic goals are for the quarter, right? You type it in here. And as an example, if you watch line 18, as I type in my next goal here, you can see it'll automatically flip down there for you. And, so we want to agree on our 3 strategic goals. And then down here in this section, we want at least one tactical goal that aligns with that. We kind of gave you space for 2 as an optional. One thing we want to be very careful of is if you have too many goals, you probably won't achieve any of them. I remember one of our HTG peer groups,
right.
we had some new members show up, and we had some direction to go set 3 strategic goals, and they came back with 9. Right. And I remember all the owners in the group saying, you will not achieve 9. And they're like, we can do all of these. And they're like, no, you can't. And we can do all of these. And it was pretty awesome to see them come back to the next meeting, having completed none of them because they had too many. And it was awesome
Rex,
to watch them.
We had somebody just recently, well, they joined maybe 5 quarters, 6 quarters ago in one of my owners groups. And they started off saying, wow, we had never heard of EOS. And they wanted to go do EOS. And then they said, next quarter, we've never heard of C-level. We're going to go do C-level. Then they came back and they said, we had never heard of the service executive peer group, and we're going to do that. And before we know it, they have all these initiatives going. And sure enough, in that 4th meeting, they came back and they said, okay, we can't do them all. That's right. You got to start small. And so Lori was very clear with us about that. She said, you got to make sure you train people that no more than 3 SMART goals. Now, what we did put in here are target dates though. So you can set them up a couple different ways. Okay. You could set it up one way. So it would be a month at a time, or you could have one be month and one be a quarter. You could have them overlap. Excuse me. But the point is you don't have to have all of them stacked like this. And you certainly don't have to have 6.
Completely agree. The important thing is that you are creating an alignment between what are the tactical things we're going to ask individuals to work on this quarter and give them all due dates and do check-in meetings with them. How you doing on those goals? Is there any support we can offer you? And have that all be aligned with that strategic goal. And I tell you, it feels good when you start hitting your strategic goals.
It does. I think that's another important thing, Rex, to bring up is don't make them so hard they're not realistic. Okay, like make them realistic, knock them off, and it helps everybody. You know, I love having a little pad of paper and I cross them off all day long. It just feels better as the day goes.
Check mark. So down here in the 4th section, we have a little place to sign off. You know, hey, we had the meeting this day. We really discussed and worked on goal number 3. We feel it's 20% complete. And these are some notes and the main thing you want to capture in the notes is what actions somebody is supposed to take and what that accountability is, right? In the EOS, it's the to-dos, getting those to-dos assigned so that you can track them, right? When you come back to your same page meeting next week, you can look at this and say, okay, Dan, you were supposed to review with the engineers. Did we get that done?
Okay? That's right.
So that's why it's so important to have this kind of continuous string of tracking.
That's
and
right.
Again, if you don't want to use this spreadsheet to track this and you want to do it in tickets or a project or in your traction tools or whatever it is you want to use, please do so. And then the scorecard. So we'll get back to that in just a second.
So, look at you with your PowerPoint wizardry, Rex. Well done.
We practiced, okay? So
well done.
The leadership development tab. So Dan, I'll kind of let you run with this one.
Yeah. So, and we're not going to pull up the leadership plan. Okay. That's different. This is the alignment plan. But the leadership plan, the point is for the leader, the key owner, the MD or the owner or the CEO, the president, whoever's owning this document should pick at least 3 people that they want to pour into for the next year. Okay. Part of that is so all of us as leaders, okay, Rex, me, everybody has a gap. All right. Here, I'll put my gap in the light there. Has a gap of where they need to be and where they are now. Okay. Sometimes it's a negative thing. Okay. And that's when you have to terminate. Sometimes it's just simply, hey, the goal keeps moving. We've got to do better. And here's the gap. What are we going to do to get there? And so part of the leadership plan and part of the responsibility of an owner is to have vision of where they need to be successful. Okay, so we are going to have a leadership plan, sort of this development plan reference, and just say that this is the gap. How are we doing? This is much more of the fluid portion of the plan. The KPIs and the metrics are the very concrete, but the leadership development is the fluid. And so the sort of thing that I got on my leadership plan was, hey, be more involved on a one-on-one basis when there's something going on. Sit down, be more hands-on and hands-in. And I tended to delegate more and to say, hey, well, get back to me at the end of the day. And the advice I got was, don't let go of it so quick. Get in there and help. So then when we would have a meeting like this, I can imagine the conversations being, so give me some examples. How did it go? Are you practicing that? Working that muscle a little bit. And those are the things that we're trying to focus on here. Does that make sense?
Perfect. I love the 4 helpful lists.
Me too.
And we're going to bounce into the spreadsheet here and take a look at that. But the key to the 4 helpful lists, and you can do this on almost anything that your organization is struggling with. And one of the first ones that we advocate you do is a 4 helpful lists of how is the alignment between the owner and the service executive, right? And you might do another 4 helpful lists around how well is the service department performing for the company. You can do a 4 helpful lists around client onboarding, right? What's wrong, right with the way we onboard clients? What's wrong with the way we onboard clients? What's missing in the way we onboard clients? And what's confused in the way we onboard clients? So I'm going to flip over and we'll look at that for helpful list tab here. And, it's neat when you start working this list, what's right about the alignment between the owner and the service executive, right? We like each other, right? We like each other. Or hopefully it's not in the what's wrong category there. But we like to start by putting as many things in the what's right column as we can, because it sets a positive tone for the discussion. But it's kind of funny is while you're working on this, you might come over and say, oh, I got something for what's wrong, and you'll throw it over here real quick, whatever it is. But try to focus on the what's right column and build that out until you've kind of exhausted anything else you can think of. And as you start to switch to the negative side of the discussion and what's wrong, you'll find yourselves having discussion. Well, was that wrong, or is that missing, or is that confused, right? And you'll go back and forth. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, you'll find that while this column tends to look by this long, you're going to find sometimes more in this column than you had in your what's right column. And there'll be a few things here and a few things here. And once you're kind of getting the real issues out on the table, then you have this clarity to find how you're going to resolve it. And Dan, you want to add any color there?
Yeah, I would say that I echo everything you said, Rex. What's important about the what's right column is when the world feels like it's falling apart, okay, and it happens a lot in our businesses, it feels like everything's falling apart, is then all of a sudden you start putting things up onto that what's right list and you realize, you know what, it's not so bad after all. And I've said this before a lot, is I actually use this tool as part of our QBR process with all of our clients. And they thought everything was falling apart, and it was one red ticket out of like 400 greens. So you start focusing on what's right. The money, though, where you make the money is finding those things that are missing and confused, okay? Because hopefully you've got a team full of A players, and all it is just some tweaking, okay? And what we do is you go through and you look for threads. And there we go. Rex is already putting some colors in there for me. And so maybe you find something along the same thread across all of those columns. Then what we do is we make that into the first core issue and put an action item with it if you want. Okay, or it becomes a strategic goal and it's got a series of tactical goals. But the ultimate goal here is let's find 2 or 3 big ticket items that we can pull and extract out of all of these lists that is a core issue. If you try to leave here, same sort of thing, Rex. If you try to leave with 15 core issues, they're not core. Okay, just find a few that are really core and then come back to it again. We put in here, you could do it every quarter if you want. You can do it as frequently as you want. Do it with your onboarding process. Do it with your project handoff process. Do it with, an offboarding, anything you want. And I think you'll get a lot from it.
I totally agree. The biggest thing is that you create an action items and accountability for who and when, right? So the scorecard. This is something that's really important in the EOS methodology, is having your weekly scorecard. As I jump over the spreadsheet, we kind of broke this into service department scores and business scores, right? There's certain scorecard items that are more business related and certain scorecard items that are more service department or ticket related and that kind of stuff. So as we jump over here to the weekly scorecard, again, I want to be very clear that these are some ideas to start with. You may find that these are not the things that are important to you, or you may find that some of these things are important. What's most important is that you decide what is your most important. And I could tell you in C-level's own experience with scorecards and our weekly level 10 meetings, uh, the things that we put on our scorecard 3 years ago are not the same things that are on there now. But it was through the act of trying to measure and using what we did put on there that we discovered, man, this other thing actually seems more important. And we leave them on and we change the items on our scorecard, or at least it's up for discussion if we should change them at our quarterly meetings. So, um, but the idea is to start building out your scorecard. And I'll tell you, many of our clients are doing this in BrightGauge, or other tools like 90.io or traction.tools. But there's definitely a lot of ways to do this. The interesting thing is at first you're just typing some numbers in, but once you've got this filled in down to here, you're going to start to find some patterns. And you're going to start to find that, ooh, this really is a key thing, or that I'm just not getting any value out of calculating and inputting that number every week. But when you start to see those patterns, that helps you decide what actions to take. Any other thoughts there?
I think it's well said. Again, to reiterate, these were just examples we put in there. You can have more or less in different ones, but make it a manageable number.
So let's hit on the concept of a budget for the service department. And we understand probably 9 out of 10 of you that are listening right now do not have a budget for the service department. So we tried to put together something to help you get started. And remember, I was talking about when my owner first started showing the financial metrics to me, and I didn't necessarily understand them. When he first started showing them to me, I wasn't asking any questions. But the more we looked at them, the more we discussed them, the more questions I started to ask. I started to ask, like, well, what is a labor cost of goods sold, right? Does the dispatcher go into labor cost of goods sold, or is that administrative overhead? And eventually I learned, nope, the dispatcher is a service cost of goods sold. Well, what about my engineer when they're on PTO, when they're on vacation? Is that a service cost of goods sold, or is that an administrative overhead? And no, that's a service cost of goods sold, right? So the more I looked at this, the more I understood it, the more I tried to understand how I can impact the numbers and impact the budget. It was through that made me understand it more. So in here, we're going to look at revenue and cost of goods sold. We normally refer to that as COGS. And when you take your revenue minus your cost of goods sold, you'll have your gross margin dollars. And then your gross margin percent would be your gross margin dollars divided back by the revenue. So when we said we had a 50% gross margin, we're basically saying we had $100,000 in service revenue, $50,000 in service costs. That gave us a 50% gross margin. So that's kind of where that's coming from. And then I will tell you, service leadership, the index, which we're going to talk about in a couple more minutes here, related to a service exec quarterly report book. They break out the profit centers in service, and this is really an industry standard of cloud resale, right? That's reselling of Office 365. You'll have revenue, you'll have cost, and you'll have margins. And then you'll have technical services, which is your ad hoc break fix work. You'll have professional services, which is your scoped, pre-scoped, pre-signed off project work. And then you'll have your managed services, which is typically your flat rate, value-based pricing, service delivery model. And we find that the margins for technical services are kind of the lowest way. It's the most expensive way to service your clients, therefore generally yielding the lowest service margins. Professional services, they get better because they're scoped in advance. We make sure product is on site before we go on site, that kind of stuff. And typically your engineers are billing, instead of 3 or 4 or 5 hours a day of their 8-hour day on project, when they're doing projects, they're typically billing closer to 8 hours of their 8-hour day. And in managed services, because we're leveraging tools and technology and standardization, we typically get the best margins of all three ways. And then the fifth one there is shared infrastructure. That's when you build some sort of a computing environment and you own that environment, but you're selling it to your clients to leverage that environment for their systems. So, so as we look at this budget here in a second, keep that in mind. I want to let you know at 4 o'clock later today, Eastern time, I have a session about getting started with business budgeting that you may want to turn into or find the recording later. So, so let's take a look at this budget tab. The way it's lined out is we got our 12 months here is what is our revenue plan to be, right? This is our revenue section. And you can kind of put in what you expect it to be over the next 12 months, right? This is how we create a budget. And then for technical services, we may break that into break fix. And you may not decide you don't want to use any of these extra categories, right? You just want to say, for break fix work, we think our revenue is going to be this, and just focus on one line. Or if you're getting more experience with it, you may use these other sections. That's totally up to you as you begin your budgeting process. Service revenue related to projects, what your managed services revenue is going to look like. And again, you may not break out into this detail. You may just use the top line here. And then an area to put in your cost of goods sold and what you expect to happen there. If you decide, oh, we're gonna buy Avic, right? And we plan to add that in April, then you'll go ahead and put Avic, you start putting your Avic costs in over here. And then down here at the bottom, you're going to get a lot of calculations on what your planned margins are in each of the lines of business, and you'll get your overall margins. And the idea of making a budget is to, you are to some extent using a crystal ball, but you're saying this is the plan. And if you're each month or quarter, you can look at how good did we do at achieving our budget. And the first cycle of trying to work from a budget, you'll probably find that you're pretty far off, but you'll learn. And the next season, when you make your budget, hopefully you'll make a budget that you can come closer to, and you'll measure whether you're on or off budget as you're going through the months and quarters. Mm-hmm. So the last thing that I think we want to chat about here is our last tab, which will be the Service Exec Quarterly Report Book Deep Dive.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So this is only available to members of the Service Exec peer group. Okay, so if you are watching this and you're a member of the IT Nation, but not yet a member of IT Nation Evolve peer groups, this isn't available. However, feel free to reach out to Kip Stumpf or Jody Hicks, and either of those people can get you plugged into a peer group. So the way that this deep dive tool works is you're going to take the spreadsheet that that service leadership sends to you, and we're going to plug in some numbers, but really we're going to talk through numbers, and we're going to kind of flesh out what's going on and help you as a service exec. And we recognize, by the way, that most service execs have no financial background, no financial training, no accounting training. So we understand that, and that's why we put this tool together. So Rex, let's go ahead and let's go over and let's check out that tool. And I'll just quickly go through the different sections. We're not going to read every question. Okay, but it's helpful. We did put it into the spreadsheet here and kind of spaced it out. The first section, it's all about the revenue. Now, for the business owners watching, it's just the service revenue that we're really interested in, okay? Because as a service manager, you need to own this. So we're going to ask, which is the biggest share? What's growing slowly? What's growing quickly? Is it consistent growth? Is it inconsistent growth, and so forth. So again, very free answers as we're thinking through it. The next section down, of course, will be our costs. Okay, COGS, cost of goods sold, or COGS for short. And what we're looking for here is, are they proportionate to the revenue? So if they're going up, that's fine, but they need to be going up a little slower than the revenue, okay? And we're going to just start looking and asking questions. And as Rex clearly said, if you take revenue and you subtract COGS, you end up with step 3, service gross margin dollars. And so again, we're going to ask some of those important questions. Which is largest? Which is growing? Why? right? Why? We need to know the why behind this. It's not just because it was lucky one month or one quarter, okay? And then we're going to ask about consistency. We want to know, where are we making our money? Section 4, and this one really matters when it comes to some of the ratios, is this is headcount. Okay, we need you to be aware of headcount. So especially in dynamic environments where you have people coming and going, or part-time and full-time, well, let's look at that, because if you just hired somebody, and let's say it was an entry-level person with benefits, it's $50,000 a year, or to use easy numbers, $36,000 a year, that's $3,000 of cost a month. And are they generating enough revenue to cover that? Okay. Step 5 down there is total revenue. So now we're going to compare services against all of our revenue. And the reason that matters is we call that product mix. We need to know, how are we doing service dollars versus product and total revenue dollars. Okay, so that's very, very important. Step number 6 is about service gross margin percentage by line of business. Okay, a lot of different things there. Number 7, and this is where it starts to get fun. So if you're in the owners group, but not in the Evolve owners groups, but not in the Evolve service exec groups, then you haven't seen these yet. But these are the new service operations and metrics. And we're going to look at things around contracts and endpoints or end users, engineers, ticket counts, and we're going to start looking at those in relation to one another. Are we making money? How many tickets should an engineer be able to solve? Okay, all of those sorts of things. And then the last one on here, number 8, are just some more of these ratios. So we're going to be looking at some various things. Now, benchmarking is important, and Rex, you know this well. Benchmarking is important because you're comparing yourself against your community, whether it's the peer group or the whole industry. And without that comparison, you're on an island, and there's no need to do it. So we really recommend that when you start benchmarking, you become part of a peer group and you start benchmarking, that you look at how you're doing against the people you want to be like. I want to be the best. So what do I need to do to get there? And again, that's where you can develop your strategic goals and your tactical goals.
All right, we are almost finished. So we, if you're interested in downloading something that I created for the community about the decisions you make as you're progressing your career and growing the maturity and valuation of your business, feel free to do this, clevelops.com/key decisions. The QR code should get you there. And most importantly, we're going to wrap up the recording at this point, but we will be available for a live Q&A on my Zoom room for the rest of the hour at clevelops.com, or I'm sorry, clevelops.zoom.us/my/Rex Frank. This QR code should get you there as well. And look forward to seeing you guys in the Q&A. And as always, please don't forget to do your session survey. And but I look forward to seeing you guys in the Q&A here in just a few minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Rex. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you later.